Hello everyone, my name is Chirag. Today we are going to deploy FortiGate firewall in AWS. So let's get started. So this is the agenda that we are going to discuss today. First, we need to talk about AWS infrastructure because we need to deploy AWS infrastructure first before deploying any VMs. So we will deploy the infrastructure. I will also talk briefly about, what does that mean? What is the meaning of AWS infrastructure, different components. Then we will deploy FortiGate VM. In addition to that, we will also deploy a Windows VM behind FortiGate. So the traffic would be filtered by FortiGate firewall. And we are going to publish that Windows virtual machine out on the internet so that we have direct access to the Windows VM. We are going to test RDP connection to it. We are going to deploy a web server and test its connection from the internet. And last but not the least, we will also verify the connectivity. We will check the logs, and that is the agenda of today's presentation. So let's get started. So this is the lab topology. Let's first talk about a few important concepts. So in AWS, what you see in gray color, that is the AWS cloud, which is naturally it is connected to the internet. And within AWS, what you need to do to start building AWS infrastructure, you need to create a VPC. A VPC is nothing but a virtual network that you create in your AWS account, and AWS calls it Virtual Private Cloud (VPC). So what you see in light blue is your VPC. That is the first thing that you need to create. So in this case, it is 10.0.0.0/16. The larger network, that is your VPC, that is your virtual network. Within that virtual network, we have two different subnets. So we have a public subnet, which is a subset of the larger network. This is 10.0.0.0/24. And we also have another network, which is called the private subnet, and that is 10.0.1.0/24. So that is our next step. Once we have that, and in order to get internet access, so we need internet gateway. So we will also deploy an internet gateway, which is the component over here. That internet gateway should be connected to the VPC. So our VPC is this, and we will create an internet gateway, connect to this VPC. And after that, we will also create routing tables. So there are two different subnets. There is a public subnet and the private subnet. So that would be two separate routing tables, one for the public subnet, the other for the private subnet. The public subnet routing table will have a zero route. That means 0.0.0.0/0, which means any network, any subnet mask. So anything destined to the internet, and we will route that traffic. We will point that traffic now to the internet gateway. So in AWS, by default, any subnet that you create, that is the next hop for any subnet. So let me just draw this. In every subnet, when you create a VPC, so this was the first step that we did. Whenever you create a VPC, an intrinsic router is created. Azure networking, AWS networking is a little different from the traditional networking. So whenever you create a VPC, an intrinsic router is created, and whatever subnets that you create, the default gateway is this intrinsic router. So if the subnet is 10.0.0.0/24, in AWS networking, the first IP address 10.0.0.1, which is part of this subnet that is reserved for this intrinsic router. So any traffic which wants to talk to internally, so any traffic that originates from 10.0.0.0 to any 10 network, that will go to 10.0.0.1, the intrinsic router, and the intrinsic router will route it out. So if it is about the public subnet, the intrinsic router will automatically route it via the internet gateway, and then it will go out. That is the flow for the public subnet. Now about the private subnet. The private subnet also, 10.0.1.0/24. So the first IP address 10.0.1.1, the very first IP, and this subnet is reserved for the intrinsic router. So any traffic that tries to go to any 10 network, so if destination is 10.0.0.0/16, all requests will go to the intrinsic router by default. That is the default routing behavior in AWS. All right, so that is the networking fundamental of cloud. Now, I talked about the public subnet, I talked about private subnet, I talked about internet gateway, I talked about the intrinsic router, I also talked about routing tables. So that should take care of the networking. Once that is done, we will deploy the FortiGate VM, after which we will deploy the web server, and then we will publish it on the internet so that we can access it from anywhere outside. So from the outside, we should be able to access the Windows server using RDP, remote desktop protocol. We will also deploy a web server on this particular server and access it using HTTP. So let's get started. So let's first get the ball rolling. Let's first create the VPC. That is our first step. So we will go to Azure console. So it is already open, but if you're now, the URL is this: console.aws.amazon.com. You log into that URL, and this is the dashboard that you see. Now, to create a virtual networking in AWS, the first thing you need to do is VPC. So I have a shortcut over here, but if you don't have, you can, for any AWS services, you can search over here, and you will find all the results, all the services you find here. So VPC, it's already here. So anywhere you click, and you go to the VPC console. So that's your VPC console. So the first step is go to VPC. I have none. This is fresh. I have deleted everything for this demonstration. On the top right corner, click on Create VPC. Here, make sure VPC only is selected and give a name. So VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, or your virtual network, give it a name. So I can say FortiGate Lab 1 VPC. And what is the larger network? What is the network of your VPC? So my VPC is a larger network, 10.0.0.0/16. And that's about it. We can click on Create VPC. That will create this virtual network VPC. All right, our VPC is created, and it is 10.0.0.0/16. So that is successful. So going back to our diagram, our VPC is created here. Let me get the spotlight. Yeah, so our VPC is created. And now the next thing is we are going to create the public subnet and the private subnet. All right. So let's go back to our console. On the left column, click on subnets and click on create subnet. That subnet is going to be part of the larger subnet, which is your VPC. So you need to select your VPC from the drop-down menu. If you have more than one, make sure you select the correct one. I just have one VPC though, so that's all I see. And you need to name your subnet. So I'll call it public subnet. And this is the larger network. This public subnet is part of 10.0.0.0/16, the larger network. What is the subnet of my public subnet? That is going to be 10.0.0.0/24. So it's a subset of 0./16. So it's 10.0.0.0/24. And click on create subnet, which will create your subnet. So your subnet is created. We will create one more subnet, which is our private subnet. Again, part of the same larger subnet, which is your VPC. Give name to your private subnet. Private subnet. It's part of 10.0.0.0/16, and this particular subnet, private subnet, is 10.0.1.0/24. Click on create subnets. So your two subnets are created. So going back to the diagram, we have VPC created, we have public subnet created, we have private subnet created. Now we need to create the internet gateway and the routing tables. So let's try that. Going back to our AWS console. Okay, so this is created. Let's create the internet gateway. So on the left, select internet gateways, click create internet gateway, give it a name, for example, FortiGate internet gateway, and click create internet gateway. So your gateway is created. Now you observe it is successfully created, and it is giving a note that you need to attach it to a VPC. So if you have more than one VPC, you need to define to which VPC it is to be attached. And there is an option right after you create an internet gateway to attach it to a VPC. So we'll do that again to show you on the diagram, just to clarify. So you have created an internet gateway, and this internet gateway you need to attach to a specific VPC. You may have more than one VPC, so you need to define to which VPC it belongs to. So we are going to attach it to the VPC that we have created. So it is part of 10.0.0.0/16 subnet. So let's do that. We'll click on attach to a VPC and click on the blank space. It will list all the VPCs. We will select the VPC from the list and click on attach internet gateway. So internet gateway is attached. Let's go back to routing tables. We have two routing tables created. We have two subnets created. Now is the time to create route tables. So VPC is created, subnets are created, internet gateway is created. Now let's create route tables. So by default, there is a default routing table that is also called the main routing table. In the main column, you say yes. Any other routing table, any custom routing table that you add would not have that word main. You can make use of the default routing table also, but for simplicity, I'm not touching the default routing table. I'm creating two new routing tables, one for the public subnet, the other for the private subnet. So on the top right corner, click on create route table, give it a name. I'll call it public route table. And this public route table belongs to which VPC? It is part of which VPC? So from the drop down, select your FortiGate Lab 1 VPC. And that's it. Click on create route table. Your route table is created. Now this is your public route table, and there is a subnet associations tab. So again, let me go back to the slide and discuss. So you have a public subnet, you're creating a route table that is called public route table. This public route table is for this particular subnet, and to define that, you need to associate the subnet with this route table. That has to be an association when you create a route table. So that's what we need to do next. Okay, going back to our console. So that is a tab called Subnet Associations. Click on that. Click on Edit Subnet Associations. And both subnet, all of your subnets would be listed here. Since you're uh, associating your public route table, so that public route table should be associated with the public subnet, which is 10.0.0.0/24. Click on Save Associations. And now if you go back, you should have that listed over here. So the public route table has been associated with 10.0.0.0/24, which is the public subnet. That portion is done. Go back to the routes tab. Now what you see by default, there is a route which says if the destination is your VPC network. So this is your larger network. If there is any traffic which is destined to 10.0.0.0/16, then just keep it local. The next stop should be local. So do not route it outside, just keep it within that particular VPC. That is the meaning. So this is the route. Uh, by default, all subnets have a similar route. So any traffic for 10.0 network, 10.0/16 network remains within that particular subnet. It is there. Now, what about the internet route? So if you are going to the public subnet, let's talk about this. Public subnet, what is the purpose of this public subnet? You need traffic to go out on the internet. So that's why you need a zero route. So 0.0.0.0/0, you need a zero route. So that's what we need on the public route table. So let's create that. Going back to the console. So how do you add a route? On the right side, that is Edit Routes button. Click on that. And you have on the left, you have Add Route button. So here, click in the blank box and it will show you all the options. You can even type, but we have it ready. So 0.0.0.0/0, any subnet, any network, any subnet, that means anything on the internet. And what is the target? What is the next stop? So that is our internet gateway. I want to route it via the internet gateway. Which internet gateway? So again, click over here, and this is the only internet gateway that I have, FG-IG. Click on Save Changes. All right, so now we have a zero route, which says uh, two routes. It says if your destination is 10.0/16, keep it local, do not route it outside. If anything else apart from that, then route it to your internet gateway, which means it will go out on the internet. That is that route. Okay, so our public route table is complete. We have two routes. One is the local route, the other is your static default route. We also have subnet, public subnet associated with the public route table. So that part is over. We can go back to the step of route tables. So click on the route tables link. Here's the route table. We need to create one more route table, which is called our private route table. This is meant for the private subnet. Belongs to which VPC? We have only one VPC, so we'll select that. Make sure you select the correct VPC. Click on create route table, and your private route table is created. Again, like before, even in private route table, there is a route which says if your destination is anything from 10, so 10.0 anything /16. If that is the target, if that is the destination, then keep it local. Don't send it anywhere out. It is there by default. We need a zero route, but we will add it later when we have the FortiGate firewall. So we'll save it for now till we have FortiGate firewall. So that part is done. How about subnets? We have not associated any subnets with this route table. It is an important step. So click on subnet associations button. Click on edit subnet association and select private subnet. Click on save associations. All right. So if you go back, you should be able to see 10.0.1.0 associated with the private route table. So we are good. Our route tables are ready. So VPC is done. This is our VPC. Our both subnets are done. Our route tables are done. They have been associated with the correct subnets. In the main, there is only default which says yes. The other custom route tables say no, so they are not default route tables. We are not going to use the default route table. We are going to use the public and private route tables. Our internet gateway has been defined. So pretty much our infrastructure, when we talked about the initial part, so infrastructure that is done. Now it is time to create FortiGate VM. So let's go back and create a FortiGate VM in AWS. So a VM in AWS is called EC2, which stands for Elastic Compute Cloud, EC2. So compute cloud is C2. And you can, again, it's a service, so you can search for EC2. And you can click here. I already have it bookmarked, so whichever way is feasible for you, use that. So you are here in the EC2 console, and we need to a VM is called an instance in AWS. So just click on launch instance, and we will name our FortiGate firewalls. I can say FG Lab 1. Now here I need to search for which image, which operating system image I need. So FortiGate has published the FortiOS images on AWS Marketplace. We can search here. This is basically going to search on AWS Marketplace for whatever search criteria you write. I'm going to search for FortiGate, hit enter, and it will search across AWS Marketplace for that keyword. So as you can see, AWS Marketplace AMIs, that is AWS machine image. So this is FortiGate image in AWS. There are 12 different images. What I'm going to use is this one, FortiGate firewall. Bring your BYOL is bring your own license, next generation firewall. You can also use the others. These are pay as you go. There are two different subscription models. I already have a license and I don't want to pay for additional charges to Fortinet, so I will use my own license. If you do not have a FortiGate license, you can use any you can use the first one. This is for ARM64 platform. So you typically we will use this. If you do not have a FortiGate license, use this, which is PAYG, pay as you go subscription, and this is the charge. And if for lab purpose, this is quite cost effective, and it is a free trial. So initially, for evaluation period, maybe 1 week, 2 weeks, it would be free. So you can use that. Since I already have a license, I'm going to use this particular instance. So click on select. Now, an important thing, when you are selecting this, when you are using a FortiGate image for the first time, you also need to subscribe to the instance. So when you say subscribe now or subscribe on instance launch, I'm going to use this option. But when you say subscribe, basically you are authorizing for the subscription service from Fortinet. So it is like terms and conditions. You need to go through it. You need to approve. You need to authorize that. That is an additional step that you might need to do. I have already done that. I've already authorized that, gone through that process. So I'm good. I can click on subscribe on instance launch. In your case, you might need to click on subscribe now. Then go. It will ask a few questions. Just make sure you authorize Fortinet. You authorize for the charge. That you are okay to go for this. Whatever amount is there. So in my case, I've already authorized. So I will click on subscribe on instance launch, and it will take me to the next step. So here I have defined the name. This is the image, and this is the instance type. That means how large VM do you want. C6i dot extra large. It is 4 virtual CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM. For lab purpose, I do not need that much. The more processing power you get from AWS, the more you are charged. I don't want to do that. For me, even one virtual CPU and 2 gigs of RAM is enough for this lab. So T2.small instance type is absolutely fine for this lab. I will use that. This is an additional step. Key pair. This is an important step that we did not do. So I already have a key, but let me just show you. Basically, it's a certificate that you need, and you need to provide that, and it will download a certificate file. You need to use that file to decrypt the password. For example, uh, subsequently we will deploy FortiGate firewall, we will deploy a Windows VM, and to access those devices we would need the password. So say for example, to access Windows Server, how do you know the password? So we will use that certificate, that key pair, to view the Windows password. And this will become more evident when we actually use it. So once again, I will go to EC2. I have a shortcut over here. So I'll go to EC2, and under network and security, there is key pairs. I'll click that. I already have one key pair. I will create one more new. I will create one more just to show you. So I'll click on create key pair. I'll give it a name, lab1 key pair. Uh, the algorithm is RSA. I'm fine with that. And the format, there are two different formats. If you're using PuTTY and you're connecting to SSH, you would need .ppk. I'm going to use this to decrypt Windows password. For that, I need .pem file. So I'll select that and click on create key pair. And that's about it. So your key pair is created. Let's go back to our previous screen. So here you can click on the refresh button because this is recently created. If we want to see it right now, without that, if you see, oh, so it refreshed itself. So you have both the options, lab1 key pair. I'm going to use this one, and this will become more evident when we actually access the devices. Okay, so the next part is network settings. So on going back to the FortiGate firewall, so these are network settings that we need to define. We are going to define, so this particular wizard just allows you to configure one particular port. The other port we will configure later. But There will be two ports, port 1, which is your internet facing, port 2, that is your LAN or DMC facing. So this is what we need to define. Let's create that. Going back to AWS console, so click on edit. Let's make sure everything is fine. It is part of the same VPC, the only VPC that we have. It is part of the private subnet. Now we are going to configure only one interface in this wizard. Let's just configure only one interface, and this is what we are going to configure, which is part of the public subnet. So we need to change that. By default, it has selected private subnet. So click on that and select public subnet. So we want that particular interface. In AWS, an interface is called an ENI, Elastic Network Interface. So we have selected that. Auto assign public IP, I do not want that. Security group is like an ACL, access control list, and that is mandatory. So we need that. We'll give an easier name. This name is very long, so I can call it FGSG security group. The description is also a mandatory field, so we will use the same keyword. And this security group is like an ACL, access control list. By default, all outbound traffic is allowed. So again, to show you, so your security group, for example, for this particular, you're creating a security group, all outbound traffic is allowed by default, but inbound traffic is not allowed. By default, it is denied, and you need to write specific ACLs, access control lists, to allow traffic. So you'll say, yeah, I want to allow port 80, I want to allow RDP 3389, so on and so forth, right? So that's what we are going to do. Let's go back. So this is nothing but an access control list, layer 3, layer 4. So it says port 22 is allowed from anywhere. That's fine. It's a FortiGate firewall. I need SSH. 443 from anywhere 0000. That is also fine. I am okay with that. 541, I do not need that. I can click on remove. 3000, I don't need that. I can click on remove. 8080, I don't want. So these are the two management ports that I would need. This is the storage space which is created, and we need this. So this is the default storage space. I'm good with this. If you want additional space, you can configure this. For this particular lab demonstration, the default values are fine. So again, you can recap. T2 small, this is a very important thing to consider. Make sure you select the correct instance type. One vCPU, 2 gigs of RAM is enough for this demonstration, and that's what I'm going to use. So once everything is done, click on launch instance. It is going to take some time to deploy the VM, to bring the VM up. It will take some time. All right, so it has initiated. We can go back to, so click on EC2. We are back in the EC2 console. Click on instances, and you should be able to see this instance. What is the instance state? It is pending. So right now it is in the background. It is deploying the VM, picking it up. While it is cooking, let's do a few couple of things. Let's go back to our diagram. Let's see what is pending. So our subnets are done, route tables are done. This is done. Internet gateway is done. Okay, there is one more VM we need to create, which is our web server, okay, or Windows server. So let's do that in the meantime. Going back to the console, once again we are on instances. We can click on launch instance, give it a name. This is we are going to deploy a Windows server. I can call it the server. Here, we can search for a keyword on AWS Marketplace. So I'll just search for the keyword Windows, hit enter. There are different images that you can select, and I'm going to select this one, 2019 base, and that is also eligible for free tier. The current account that I'm using is free tier, so that's what I'm going to use. Click on select. Again, I skipped that, but I'm creating all the resources in Mumbai region. So these are different regions. Asia Pacific Mumbai, it is short for AP, Asia Pacific dash South dash one, that is Mumbai region. So make sure you create all your regions in the same region. if it is if you create regions, if you create resources in different regions, then they would not work. You need to make sure you're in the same region. For me, Mumbai is the closest, so I'm going to use that. Okay, so 2019 base, I'm going to select this image. All right, and what is the size? It says T2.micro, one vCPU, 1 gigs of RAM, absolutely fine for this lab. One gig of RAM would be very slow, but I think that would be very cost effective. So I'm fine with that. Again, it is asking for key pair. So the certificate key pair that we had downloaded, we can use the same key pair in multiple VM installations. So I'm going to use the same one, lab one key pair. Networking settings, let's verify. So click on edit. VPC, we only have one VPC, 10.0.0.0.16, that's fine. The web server, so the Windows server, that is going to be, the Windows server is here, and that should be part of the private subnet. So we need to make sure we select the correct subnet. Going back to the console, yeah, it is part of the private subnet, which is good. Security group, yeah, we can create a security group, give it a meaningful name. For example, WinSG, description is mandatory, so we'll just paste the same name. Security group 3389, which is RDP, TCP 3389 is allowed from anywhere, which is fine. Again, this is a lab environment, so all zero is fine. Allowing specific port from anywhere on the internet is absolutely fine. For the lab, for production, you need to restrict it to specific public IPs. Okay, and in future, I'm also going to deploy a web server. So maybe we can do that later. Again, the storage space, default storage space is fine. Let's just review. T2 micro is absolutely fine. Now we'll click on launch instance, and this will also get started. So click on instances again. Let's refresh the page, make sure we have both entries. Okay, so this instance is ready. Its status is running, which means we are good. Let's review a couple of things about our FortiGate firewall. So the first thing, okay, so it has this private IP address 10.0.0.100. So let's update our diagram. Let's go to Visio. Where is my Visio? Okay. What is the IP? 10.0.0.100. Okay. So this is, oh, sorry about that. So that is our public IP address 10.0.0.100. We also want to access that particular, we want to access our FortiGate firewall from the internet. To do that, we need a public IP like this. This is an old IP. This would be updated, but we need a public IP. In AWS, a public IP is called an EIP, Elastic IP. So we need to create that EIP and then map that Elastic IP with this particular IP, because that would be a mapping. In AWS, you will never find a public IP address directly on the FortiGate firewall. The public IP sits at the VPC level in AWS cloud. And what AWS does in the background, it does a DNAT. So there is a mapping between this public IP and your external interface port 1 IP. So any traffic that hits this, that gets DNATed to your port 1 IP address. So we need that public IP address. Let's create that. We have not created that yet. So to create that public IP, which is called Elastic IP, on the left panel in EC2 dashboard, go to Network and Security Elastic IPs and click on Allocate Elastic IP Address. And here I will show you what is this tag, because that is important, but I will create this particular Elastic IP without a tag, and then I will show you what it means. Okay, so here is the public IP which is allocated to us instantly from AWS, and there is no name. So the name is also a tag. So if while creating this, if we had created a tag, the name would automatically appear here. Here, that's fine. I can manually write it. So this is for FortiGate Elastic IP. This is just for our viewing purpose. It is easier to view this. So this is the public IP, the VIP that we have, and it says again, it says allocate this Elastic IP. So that is the next step. It even gives you a prompt that you have created this IP, but it has not been associated with a specific IP. So there is no mapping. So let's click on this. There are two things. You select this and go to Actions menu, or you click on that Elastic IP and then go to the Actions menu. Both are the same thing, and you say you want to associated Elastic IP address. So click on that. Associate with what? With an instance or with a network interface. Now this is another important concept. So let me talk about it. If your VM has just one interface like this VM has only one interface, one IP address, then you can select the option of instance. But when a VM has more than one interface, in this case, FortiGate has two interfaces, you cannot use that option. You need to specify an interface. You cannot specify an instance. So let me just go back to our AWS console. So that's why we cannot use the first option, because we want to map this public IP to FortiGate WAN interface, port 1. So we'll select network interface. Here, network interface, which one? From the drop-down menu. Now here, you see it is not showing the names. It is only showing the ENIs, the IDs. So to confirm, we need to go back. We need to make sure. So here on the EC2 console, go to Network and Security, click on Network Interfaces. These are the network interfaces. The first one, remember we attached security groups. So by this, I know that this is the Windows interface. So I can say Win ENI, Elastic Network Interface. And this one is FortiGate port 1. So I can call it FortiGate port 1 WAN interface. Okay. All right. Hopefully I should be able to see it here. I can refresh. Yeah, now it is showing the names because names were not there. So now it is easy for me which network interface I would want to attach this public IP with. So not the Windows CNI, not the Windows network interface. I want it with FortiGate port 1 interface, and which IP with this IP associated. All right, so now I have, again, going back to our diagram, we have the public IP. Let's update the public IP. So what is our public IP? This one. Let's update our diagram. Okay, so now it is the correct public IP. This IP is correct. Now this portion is done. This portion is done, but the LAN interface is not configured yet. Because remember, the wizard creates only one interface. The other one we need to create manually. So let's go back to network interfaces again on EC2 console, network and security, network interfaces, and we can click on create network interface. We can write a description, for example, FortiGate port 2 LAN, which subnet it belongs to. So we have two subnets. Again, subnets are not given the name, so let's give names to subnets so that we can easily identify them. And for subnet, we need to go to the VPC console. So VPC subnets, and here the names are there, but over there the names are not shown. So we need that to be part of the private subnet which ends in 23E7. So let's remember that 23E7. Which subnet? 23E7. B756, that is the WAN subnet, port 1. I want 23E7. It is part of this. And how do you want to assign the IP address? If you keep auto sign, DSCP will assign an IP address automatically. If you say custom, you can assign your own IP address. So for ease of use, I'm going to use a similar IP. So for example, in here, I'm going to use 10.0.1.100, similar IP address, so that it is easy to remember and identify. So 10.0.0.100 WAN, 10.0.100 LAN. So let's do that. So let's call it 10.0.1.100. And which security group you want to attach to this network interface, ENI. So you can use the existing FortiGate security group. That's fine. Okay. So our network interface is created. Again, let's name it FortiGate port 2 LAN so that it is easier to identify. Okay, so our public IP is there. We can use this to access the FortiGate firewall. So HTTPS and the public IP, we should be able to reach to the firewall. Okay, so let's log into the firewall because we also need to upload license, and it will be rebooted after uploading the license. What is the default username? Admin. What is the default password? Instance ID. Whatever is the instance ID of your FortiGate VM. So username is admin. How do I find the instance ID? Go back to your console, EC2 console, click on instances. You have your instances listed. This is FG Lab 1. This is your FortiGate VM. Select and then use that as the password. Paste. Okay, so it is asking you to change it. So old password, and then I'm giving it a new password. All right, password has been changed. Okay, it is asking me to upload the license. I already have a license ready. I will upload that. License key file looks like this .lic, and it will reboot. Okay, so while it is rebooting, let's go back and verify what we have done. So both interfaces have been created, which is nice. Our web server has been created. We do not know the IP address yet. So let's verify the IP address of the web server. So go back here, click on your Windows server, and it should show you the IP address. Yeah, 10.0.1.167. Let's update that. 10.0.1.167. That is our web server. Okay, so these things are done. Uh, in the WAN side public subnet, we already have a zero route, and that zero route points to takes us to the internet. In the LAN side, we do not have a zero route. We do not have the default route. And remember, what is the default behavior in AWS? Any VM routes the traffic via the intrinsic router. So for 10.0.1.167, the default gateway is 10.0.1.1, the intrinsic router, and then the intrinsic router takes it to the internet. But we do not want that. We want traffic from the web server to be filtered by the FortiGate firewall. So we need to change this default behavior. We need to modify that routing table, and we need to send it to this particular network interface, this elastic network interface. So that is what we are going to do. Okay, so let's go to our VPC console, virtual private cloud. So AWS networking, go to route tables. Public route table, let me first show you. It has got two routes, 10, anything routing internally, and 0 route routing via the internet gateway. So we are good there. Let's go to the private route table. There is only one route. It only knows how to route locally. It does not know what to do with, when you want to go outside. So let's add a route. Click on edit routes. On the left, click on add routes. In the drop down, select all 0. And the next stop, I do not want internet gateway, because internet gateway is not in the private subnet. Internet gateway is here. So this cannot talk to the internet gateway directly. So we need to route it via port 2. So we need to select, instead of the internet gateway, we need to select network interface, because we want to point that web server traffic to the ENI of port 2. So port 2 LAN, this is what we need to select. So what exactly we are doing? We are saying that for this particular server, 0.0.0.0 send that traffic to this elastic network interface. That's what we are doing. Okay, so going back to AWS console, port to LAN, and save the change. So now my routing table is okay, so there is some problem. Route tables. This ENI does not exist. I see some problem. Just a minute. Okay, Public route table is active, which is fine. Private route table, okay. Let me remove and try to edit again. So zero route, network interface. I want to route via port to LAN. Oh, 10010. Oh, okay. I think I missed one particular point. I created that network interface, additional network interface. This, you see, I found the problem. Here is the problem. So this is something, this was not intended. I missed an important part, and that's why we got into this problem. So I'm glad that I know this happened. This was not intentional. This was a miss from my end. So when we create an interface, we need to attach it to the VPC. So this is, you remember, when we deployed FortiGate, only one interface was created, and that was port 1, the WAN side. The LAN side, port 2, we created manually. And when we create an interface manually, the next step is to attach it to a specific network. So let's do that. So that's why it is not accepting the route. Okay, so we open that, we go to that network interface, we go to the actions menu, and we say attach. Attach that particular network interface. So what we are doing, we created this network interface, and we are attaching this network interface to this VPC. It is part of this VPC, and it is part of this particular subnet. That's what we are going to tell to that network interface. Okay, so let's go back. So it's which VPC it belongs to, the only VPC that we have, that larger network, and which instance. So here, to which instance we need to attach it to. So there is a Windows server instance, there is a FortiGate firewall instance. So we are attaching to this particular instance. So let's do that. And from here, we select not the Windows server, it should be part of FortiGate Lab 1, and then attach. So now it should show, if we go back to network interfaces, all should show in use. So we are good. I'm glad that that mistake happened. So that is an important step. And now if we go to VPC and try to modify that route table, we should be able to. So private route table, go back, and see zero route is now automatically active. So perfect. So we are good to go. Again, let's do a quick review. VPC is created, subnets have been created, internet gateway has been created attached to the VPC, route tables have been created, private route table has local route, it has internet route pointing to the LAN side of FortiGate. The public route table has been created, one local route, another pointing to the internet gateway. So this is fine. Internet gateway has been attached to the external side, which is fine. So we are good here. EC2 instance, we have both instances running. All right, and I think most of the things are done. Let's go to FortiGate and let's log into FortiGate to make sure we see those interfaces. So by default, only one interface was created. The other was created in the AWS console, but we also need to sync it on the FortiGate firewall. Let's go back to FortiGate firewall. Okay, so this is the FortiGate firewall. Go to network, interfaces, and you see port 1 has IP address, port 2 has not. So let's double click on port 1. For ease of use, let's give it an alias, a name which is easy to identify. So this is, let's call it public. And this is its IP address /24, and its default gateway is 10.0.0.1, which is fine. So to show you on the diagram, any subnet, the traffic goes to the intrinsic router, and from the intrinsic router it goes out. That is the default behavior for us. In the public subnet side, that default behavior is absolutely fine, so we are good with that. We are not good with that for the private subnet, so we will change that. But for this subnet we are good, so this is okay, and we will click on OK to save this. We can also change the role if you want. This is public side, WAN side, so we can say this is WAN zone. Click on OK. So it is easy to identify this is public. We will do the same thing with port 2. Make it part of LAN or DMZ. Either LAN or DMZ, does not matter. And either we can give the same IP address manually. So we already know what is the IP address, 10.0.1.100. We can type it and it would just work fine. But that is prone to error. It is possible that someone makes a typo while typing that IP address. So it is advisable to use DSCP so that it fetches that IP address from AWS. That is advisable. Now, another very important thing over here is this particular option. When you this is when you select DSCP, this retrieve default gateway is enabled by default. But what it does is, let me just show you on the diagram. So we are talking about the private subnet. What is the default router on the private subnet? The intrinsic router. So when you set DSCP for port 2 to obtain the IP address, it will obtain the correct IP address 10.0.1.100, and automatically by default it will get the default gateway as 10.0.1.1. We do not want that default gateway for our Windows server. We want our Windows servers to go via the FortiGate firewall. That's why we will change that. We will disable that option, which is very important. So this has to be disabled. In AWS routing table, we have clearly defined AWS routing table. We have defined that. Oh, this is the old diagram here. In AWS routing table, we have defined for this particular server, use this elastic network interface. So if you change this, it will get the wrong IP. So that's why we have to disable that. And that's all. We click on OK. Yeah, it is saved. Oh, we also had to name it to make it easy. This is private. Okay, looks good. So we have interfaces configured. That is fine. Let's verify what is remaining. So this part is done, firewall is done, this is done, routing, everything is done. Now, how to access this firewall? So we do not have this has a private IP address which is not accessible from the internet. We want to access that particular server. So what to do? So we need to we have a public IP. We are we are able to reach the FortiGate WAN side using this public IP address. So we will create a VIP, virtual IP, which will forward our DB traffic to this particular web server, and then we should be able to access that. So let's configure that. Okay, so going back to the console, so we can go to policy and objects, virtual IP. So we will create a VIP for RDP. We will call it VIP when RDP uh, external interface. So public facing interface, this one. This is going to be the external interface, and this is going to be the mapped interface. So let's configure that. So port 1, what is the external IP address? 10.0.0.100. What is the mapped IP address? Again, go back. So external IP address is this 10.0.0.100. What is the mapped IP address? When request reaches here for RDP, where do you want the firewall to forward the traffic to? So we want the firewall to forward the traffic to the Windows server for RDP. So 10.0.1.167. 10.0.1.167. Okay, for which service? Yeah, we want it for 3389. So that is your VIP configuration. This is part 1. VIP is configured. Now you need to call this VIP in a firewall policy to allow the traffic. So going to this, naming IN is inbound for Windows server. Incoming interface, again, the public side. Outgoing interface, the private side. So coming on port 1, going out of port 2. Source, anyone from the internet should be able to access my Windows server. What is the destination? Destination is this virtual IP, VIP, the server object that we created that is in the destination. For which service? This is for RDP. Do I need NAT? Now, again, something to discuss. While traffic, so for example, I'm here on the internet. Let me give you the actual IP address so that it makes more sense. Okay, this is my IP address. Let me also update on the diagram. So this is me, okay? This is me. When I try to access the web server and when FortiGate routes the traffic out, do you want this IP address to change? There is no need for this because I have a default route which is sending all the traffic to this Elastic Network interface. There is no need, even though it is the original public IP address, the flow is not going to be affected. Hence, I do not need NAT on this particular flow. So NAT is not required. So that's why I am not going to enable NAT. It is not required. Okay, so that's the reason. So I will disable NAT. I do not need it. I want all the logs. So I will select all sessions. For lab purposes, it is always good to enable generate logs when session starts so that you get more logs as soon as the session starts. You get the logs. Good for lab demonstrations, not very ideal for production traffic. So this is a lab, I'm okay. So two things are created, we are good. There is one last concept that I want to talk about. So in AWS, there is something called source and destination check. Source and destination check. What does that mean? Which means when my traffic enters here on this interface, any elastic network interface will only accept traffic if the destination is its IP address. So if web server is trying to reach 10.0.1.100, it will allow. But if the web server is trying to go to the internet, for example, from the web server, I'm trying to ping 8888, okay? This is what I want to do from the web server. So when traffic reaches this particular interface, if the destination if the destination IP address is anything other than 10.0.1.100, it will drop the traffic. This is because there is a source destination check. The source has to be this and the destination has to be this IP address. It cannot be anything else. That means routing is disabled by default on all elastic network interfaces. On all interfaces, by default, this is enabled. And since this is a firewall, it has got two interfaces, we internet will not work. So we need to disable this source destination check on this particular interface. Otherwise, internet will never work. So that when a web server tries to go out to 8888, even though the destination is not 10.0.1.100, because this is disabled, it will pass the traffic. So that's what we are going to do next. Okay, how to do that? Go back to our AWS console. You need to be in EC2 console. Go to network and security, go to network interfaces. Remember, on the LAN side, we need to disable that. So we have FortiGate port to LAN. Go there, go to actions and select change source destination check. By default, it is enabled, and check the box, click on save. Okay, so I think everything is done. We are in good shape. Let me do a quick verification. I have a checklist, so let's go through it. One VPC is created, subnets are created, internet gateway has been created, it has been attached to the VPC. Route tables have been created, they have been associated with subnets. We created the key pair, we created the FortiGate VM, Windows VM. The second ENI, only one ENI elastic network interface was created, so we created that. And attached to FortiGate, we forgot to do this, but then later on we did it when we got into the issue. So this has been taken care of. This part I forgot, and because there are a lot of steps, I sometimes forget that, and that's why I have kept it in bold, because I tend to forget this step. And we created an external, I'm sorry, the elastic IP, the public IP associated with it, the public IP. That mapping is done, license uploaded, FortiGate rebooted, FortiGate interface config was synced on the FortiGate firewall, so we did that. Route tables with zero routes, yeah, we did that. FortiGate NIC config, port to gateway retrieve, yes, we did that. Source destination check was done. VIP configuration is done, and we have done RDP. So we have not done anything with ping. And last thing, verify security groups. So that is the last part. Everything else has been done. Let me also verify. So basically, when I try to do, so let's go to FortiGate this. You can also get the public IP from here. So in Elastic IP, the public IP is listed here. So when you try to do RDP, so MSTSC shortcut to invoke this RDP connection screen, this uses TCP 3389 port. And security group is a layer 3, layer 4 access control list. And FortiGate firewall has a security group. So let's go to security groups and verify that we have that inbound allowed or not. So FortiGate SG, this is the security group for FortiGate. Let's double check. Yeah, it only allows, so this is what we have not. It only allows in the inbound direction, it only allows HTTPS and SSH. So our RDP will not work. So click on edit inbound rules, click on add rule, and in custom TCP, select that. There is already an RDP service created by default, which is TCP 3389. From which source? This is a lab, so I'm allowing from everywhere and save the rules. Okay, so again, going back to the diagram. So here for this firewall, there is a security group. We have allowed that. Now, after this, we will reach the Windows Server. The Windows Server also has a security group, and we need to make sure that the same rule is there. So let's verify that. Again, go back to security groups, click on Windows Security Group. Yeah, it already has 3389 allowed. So I think we have done everything, and I should be able to access that Windows server on this particular IP. So what is going to happen? My request from this IP, oh, let me get this. My request from this IP will hit this public IP, which is owned by AWS. AWS will map, since this public IP is mapped to this particular IP, the request will be forwarded to FortiGate. In FortiGate, we have a VIP, which is a mapping between this IP and this IP. So FortiGate will forward to this server, and that's how we will get to access the Windows server. Okay, let's check it in real time. Connect. Yeah, we got the prompt. Uh, this is the domain. I click on more choices, use a different account, and say dot backslash because I don't have any domain, and the username administrator, and the password. How do we know the Windows password? Now remember, at the time we started this particular session, remember key pairs, we created key pairs, right? So that is now it's practically uses here. So to get the Windows password, select Windows Server, go to Actions, go to Security, and select Get Windows Password. To get Windows password, when you created the key pair, it downloaded the file onto your PC. You need that file. So click on Upload Private Key and go back to your Downloads folder. There it is, lab1keypair.pem. Select that file. So this is that certificate file that we need to view the password. Click on Decrypt Password. And there is your password in clear text. There is a little widget. We can click on it to copy the password, paste the password, and you should be able to get in. Yeah. So this is your Windows server. You have access to your Windows server. You're in. All right. So your Windows server has loaded. Let's look at some logs. This session has got a little longer than usual. We already see traffic. So one quick way to check the logs is right click on the firewall policy, go to show matching logs. You're in the drop down, just FortiCloud, that's fine, but it is already showing. So 27, 791, 228. That's my IP address. That's the source. Destination is 10.0.0.100, which is this FortiGate WAN IP address, RDP. We already have. What is the policy ID? ID number 1, inbound Windows Server policy. If you want more details, double click on it, and here you have complete details. Hitting on port 1 WAN, this is the source IP, and that was destined DNATed. So DNAT was done to 10.0.1.167, 10.0.1.167, which is your Windows Server 13389. This is the outbound port. Protocol is RDP. The policy, which policy it hit? This policy, inbound Windows Server policy that you see here. This is your inbound Windows Server policy. All right, so I am sorry it took a little longer, but I just wanted to make sure everything is clear. So this is how you can deploy a FortiGate firewall in AWS, can deploy servers behind FortiGate, and that's how you can publish the servers and access them from the internet. Thank you very much for your time and have a good one.